Hello, and welcome to Middle East Focus, a weekly podcast on regional affairs and U.S. policy, produced by the Middle East Institute in Washington, D.C. I'm Alistair Taylor, MEI's editor-in-chief.
And I'm Matthew Czekaj, managing editor at MEI. When the United States and Israel launched their joint military campaign against Iran last Saturday, the regime in Tehran vowed to retaliate by sowing chaos across the region. One of Iran's trump cards was supposed to be separate attacks by its axis of resistance proxies. A day later, Hezbollah answered the call, firing off a handful of missiles and drones at Israel. Israel responded quickly and forcefully, and Lebanon's government and population now fear the Tehran-backed militia is dragging the country back into a war. What does Hezbollah's leadership hope to achieve, and who exactly is calling the shots? Can the Lebanese authorities prevent this latest provocation from sparking another large-scale conflict that engulfs the country? And how can Washington help?
To help us better understand these issues and more, we're joined today by Dr. Fadi Nassar. Nick is a senior fellow at MEI, where he focuses on international humanitarian and relief interventions in fragile and conflict settings, democratization, U.S. foreign policy, and Middle Eastern politics. His most recent book, UN Mediators in Syria, The Challenges and Responsibilities of Conflict Resolution, was published in 2024 by Cambridge University Press.
Our listeners can subscribe to Middle East Focus on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other podcast providers. And please check out MEI's other podcasts, Rethinking Democracy, hosted by Ganul Toll, and Taking the Edge Off the Middle East with Brian Katulis.
Nick, welcome back to the program. It's great to have you on Middle East Focus once again.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for putting a spotlight on what is an increasingly concerning situation.
Just to timestamp things for our listeners, we're speaking to Nick on the morning of March 4th. The situation is obviously very fluid, and things may have changed by the time you hear this. Nick, let's dive right in. On March 1st, Hezbollah launched a small salvo of missiles and drones towards northern Israel. What prompted it to carry out an attack now after a 15-month-long, if, to be honest, very unevenly observed ceasefire with Israel?
Thank you, Alistair. You're asking the question many Lebanese are struggling to answer and are demanding answers for. But I would say, instead of asking why this is a surprise, we need to be very honest and say Hezbollah did what they said they would do. Hezbollah vowed to respond in retaliation to an assassination on the supreme leader. And they did just that. The bigger question is why they were allowed to do this, why there was no action to ensure it could not happen. We are back at square one when a new president, a new prime minister, and a new government promised the Lebanese, it promised the international community, we would not be here, and here we are.
Nick, one thing that stood out to me was the small scale of this initial strike. And I wanted to ask you what your read on that was. Do you think that was an attempt to limit the inevitable Israeli response? Was that a reflection of the fact that Hezbollah's current capabilities are extremely constrained in the aftermath of the war with Israel? Or is there perhaps something else at play?
It's a good question. I would say it's difficult for us, those of us who are on the outside in the fog of war, to be overconfident in the assessment of, especially at this stage, of either the calculations, the logistical capabilities, the military capabilities of Hezbollah, of what the Iranian infrastructure still has in Lebanon. And I would caution against our analysis at this point. But the bigger story is the narrative. What you are saying today is exactly what those thousands of people who have been forced out of their homes, the rest of the country that is paralyzed, stuck in this moment of conflict, is saying, you have risked our security, our future, for a handful of rockets that we can count on two hands. And I would stress, it is an attack, right, that cannot impede or impact or deter Israel. There's no strategic objective here that aligns with defending Lebanon, as Hezbollah has tried to claim in the past. So when it comes to narrative, I think the point that I would stress is this is one that is lacking legitimacy on a local level. And that's the bigger story we should not lose sight of.
Do you think it's fair to say then that this finally answers the question once and for all of whether Hezbollah is an independent actor or an Iranian proxy?
Now, for me, the answer has always been clear. And what I would continue to repeat, as we have been doing here at MEI, at least in my writing, has been saying that it is Hezbollah's weapons and the use of its weapons that time and time again have served Iranian interests and brought war and ruin to Lebanon. What has happened today in particular, or in the past few past days, is that Hezbollah has demonstrated that it is willing to sacrifice and exchange Lebanon's sovereignty, its future, its people's security, its own constituents that it claims to be fighting for, in exchange for a handful of rockets to serve an Iranian strategic theater that have nothing to do with defending Lebanon or securing Lebanon. And the blowback against Hezbollah in terms of its local legitimacy is clear today in Lebanon. And it is very important to stress that this time something is very different. And we are seeing signs of that, whether it's in the government, whether it's the expectations of the people to find a solution out of this.
Nick, I want to get into something that you were just raising, which is the point of how the population in Lebanon is responding to and perceiving what's happening. In a recently published piece that you wrote for NEI, you described these scenes of columns of cars evacuating from dozens of villages throughout Lebanon, ones that Israel has warned are now in its crosshairs as it's going after Hezbollah. And you suggested in this piece that these images are going to become emblematic of what costs the group is willing to incur on Lebanon and its population as it supports Iranian war aims. I guess the question to you is there any difference in terms of different segments of the population? For example, is the Shia community viewing this any differently from the Lebanese population just in general?
Again, we are in a time in a fog of war. I'm a scholar, so when we speak about representative data in this moment, I want to be cautious. But the signs of the lack of legitimacy, the blowback, the anger, and the frustration are clear on certain levels. And let's talk about them. One is when the government made the decision, the Council of Ministers made the decision to ban Hezbollah, only Hezbollah's members voted against it. That means the other Shia representatives did not. And that matters. That is a definite signal, right, of the loss of political legitimacy, not just popular legitimacy among those outside of Hezbollah's own ideological, mindset. It's important. Beyond that, right, just think of it on a very human, personal level. This community, right, especially those living in South Lebanon, those living in the southern suburbs, those who have been in the Bekaa Valley, the war hasn't fully ended for them. Yes, there's been a de-escalation, right, of the conflict since the November ceasefire, but there have been regular, repeated attacks at a lower intensity, although that has picked up lately. And there is this question of what for? Again, it goes to the thrust of your question. What will these handful of missiles, or we've seen a new round of attacks, right, do in terms of, one, deterring further Israeli escalation, which it has done the opposite. Two, of securing their own security and future. There is a real risk today of another major invasion of Israel, and they will pay the price first and foremost. These are their homes. These are their farms. These are their industries, their businesses. And what will they get out of it? I mean, these are very real questions. When you look today at what is left of Hezbollah, I don't think there is any reasonable person who thinks it can secure any sense of victory. So you are asking people to pay a price, the ultimate price, that they have paid time and time again with no clear, credible pathway for any success, and not even for their own interests, for an Iranian regime that never came to their defense when they were and have been repeatedly attacked, even with the killing of Hassan Nasrallah. I mean, these are strong, it's beyond just images of the present, of anger. These are deeper questions of the loss of legitimacy, of the Iranian regime's internationalization of its resistance, its revolutionary project, in terms of its revolutionary economy, that has failed the Lebanese. In terms of its project of endless war and resistance, that has failed the Lebanese, it has failed the Shia community, and it offers no reasonable prospect of success. People make strategic calculations, right? And I think we are at a turning point in Lebanon and potentially broader than that.
But Nick, this is obviously not the first time that Hezbollah's actions have brought conflict and destruction and war home to Lebanon. So why exactly do you think this time is different for them?
Well, let's first talk about the sequencing of things, right? One is, what we saw after October 7th, right? A lot of the myths and narratives that Hezbollah used to uphold its legitimacy, its local standing, have really been shattered. And a lot of that has to do with the killing of its leadership. And I want to stress why this is important, right? When we're looking today, one of the biggest conversations when we talk about Iran, about the war that the United States and Israel are having, are about, do assassinations work? Well, we've seen so much discussion, especially on social media, that lacks nuance, right? When you look today at Hezbollah, when you look at the Secretary General of Hezbollah today and you compare him to Hassan Nasrallah, remarkably different. Certainly, it's not in of itself the silver bullet that destroys and decimates Hezbollah. But if you are arguing that the killing of Hassan Nasrallah did not leave a severe blow, as well as the elimination of the future of its leadership, the other cadres, I can't take that seriously. It matters. Hezbollah is today, with its arsenal battled, its pathways through Syria severed, and right now we're seeing, those of you who are following the news, a new movement of Syrian troops to ensure, right, that Hezbollah cannot infiltrate, that it cannot expose Syria, right, to Israeli attacks. It's moved to do that. Hezbollah is extremely weakened. And add to that, right, that the Iranian regime is being battered daily. It's being battered daily. And so when you're asking me today why this time is different, logistically, much weaker, militarily, much weaker, and I will stress this, it does not have the personnel, the creativity, the charisma, the intelligence, the knowledge that it had to adapt all those past years since 2006, to reinvent itself, to convince so many different theaters of its project. And I'll end on just one thought, maybe it'll open us to another conversation. Today, you use the word Iran is trying to spread chaos. The word you didn't use is the unity of the fronts. And the unity of fronts, just to refresh, our audience who is not too familiar with it, was the ability of the proxies of the Iranian regime to surround their enemies, whether it's the United States or Israel, in a line of fire. We're not talking about that today. And we're not talking about that today because the unity of fronts has been battered as a narrative, as an idea, right? And what you have is chaos. And so the axis of resistance, in terms of its strategic purpose and its functionality to pursue its purpose, is at its weakest.
Nick, before we move on to delve into the ramifications of the banning of Hezbollah's military and security activities, I did want to ask about the other side of the equation as well, which is the Israeli response that we've seen so far. Do you have a sense of the broader goals or objectives of its military operations? Are we potentially looking at a new occupation of southern Lebanon? What's your read on that?
It's difficult for me to anticipate and predict with certainty what Israel will do. I think what we've seen so far, calls to evacuate South Lebanon, certainly signal that it has many options on the table. It is in control of the escalation ladder, and its objective so far appears to be a decimation, a complete answer to the question of Hezbollah. But I would, if I may twist the question a bit, of what is the end goal we want in Lebanon. And when we deal with that question, we look at the major stakeholders at play, whether it's the United States, whether it is Israel, whether it is the Lebanese government, whether it is the Arab Gulf countries. They may have different interests, different ways of pursuing their interests. They may have severe differences. We are also talking about old rivals here. But where they converge, is on one strategic end goal in Lebanon, and that is the emergence of a reliable, credible state. Because what you want in Lebanon is exactly what you don't have in Gaza today. A credible alternative that can manage this situation and, more importantly, turn the page for Lebanon, that can resolve the issue, ensure there is no proxy in Lebanon that can turn it into a theater for Iranian escalation and hold the region, hold the Lebanese, hold them hostage. Something that I would just end on this point that I think we lose sight of at times. Iran's project in Lebanon is not just a threat to Israel, right? It is a threat, and it was a threat to Syria's future for a decade. Its intervention in Syria propelled the Assad regime. This is an odious group that committed mass atrocities. It was chief partner in organizing, structuring, mentoring, developing the militias we see in Yemen, in Iraq. This is a group that enabled, allowed, and helped shape that malign regional project of Iran. And its defeat in Lebanon, in my opinion, must come from the Lebanese state, not an external actor. The real question is, what will it take for the Lebanese state to do the job only it can do? Because if you do have, and I know I've talked a bit here, but if you do have an occupation of Lebanon, you undo all those things I was talking about earlier, which is narrative and legitimacy. Because this is something I want to stress. Hezbollah has lost the battle of ideas. It has lost the battle of ideas, but the Lebanese state has not yet won it. And it is the Lebanese state that must win it, and we can have that conversation of how it wins it. But an occupation of Lebanon does not lead to that solution.
That's actually a perfect segue because, in fact, I do want to get into who this is really up to now. And that's the Lebanese government, the Lebanese state. On Monday, the government announced that it was legally banning Hezbollah's military and security activities and restricting it to a political role. It's also called on Lebanon's armed forces, the LAF, to prevent any attacks originating from Lebanese territory. So, Nick, what does this mean in practice, and how different is this from the approach that we've seen from the government and the LAF so far vis-a-vis Hezbollah?
Again, Matt, you are asking the question I imagine many of your listeners are struggling to answer, and the fact that we don't have clear answers of that is a sign of concern. But let's talk about what it is. First of all, it is a legal move that outlaws Hezbollah's military activities and security activities, not its economic activities or its political ones, which has caused debate in Lebanon. Why it matters and why it's a bit different is it's not just a political move of consolidating the state's monopoly on force. It's a legal one. But as anyone who follows the law, a law is only as good as its ability to be enforced. And this has always been the issue in Lebanon. And so the question now, facing the Lebanese government, is how do you enforce your decision? Especially given we have seen after the issuance of this new attacks. And the Lebanese government, I will stress this, has a responsibility to its people. It has a responsibility to the international community, right? It is in a difficult position. It is in a challenging position. But again, it has a responsibility to do a job only a state can do. I want to move beyond rhetoric here and narrative to the question of understanding. We need to understand what is behind its risk aversion. It's not ideology alone. I'll talk a bit about that and then present to you guys how we can help change that, especially the United States. When you think of the risk aversion when it comes to the government's posture and the LAF's posture, which is the Lebanese Armed Forces, the army, its posture in dealing with Hezbollah, it's largely prioritized internal stability. It's more willing to avoid a direct confrontation with Hezbollah, which it views, right, as the worst case scenario, rather than a conflict that Hezbollah's arms bring about for Lebanon, which is where we are today, right? In other words, and this has been, and the repeated warnings that, I've written about here at MEI, is that this calculation of perceiving conflict with Hezbollah as more existentially threatening than a war brought because of Hezbollah's arms has been a key catastrophic mistake. And there will be a time, and there must be a time, when those behind that decision-making are held to account. Because Lebanon is where it is today because of that decision. But we are in a moment where we need action and we need solutions. What do we do from here? To shift the calculation, to build on the important political step. Sure, it's not enough, and I'm making the case it's not enough, and we haven't seen follow-through, right? Sufficient follow-through since it happened. There were some arrests, right? But some arrests don't cut it. The army is saying it's preventing Hezbollah from, deploying, moving. It's having these checkpoints. The proof is in the pudding, and the proof is simply unsatisfactory. We are at a turning point for the region. The United States is at war with Iran, right? So this is the conflict, of our time. This is the conflict, the axis of resistance the Iranian regime, has often labeled as the Great War, right? The time has come, and the Lebanese government and the security apparatus in Lebanon cannot afford its risk aversion to continue to wait and see where the winds are blowing. They have blown a certain direction, and it's time to read the room. But let me say how we can shift the calculation, because we're seeing on the one side a government that has made a positive strike. It has outlawed, right, Hezbollah's military activities, and those activities are continuing. So how do you get to the military, the LAF, implementing it? And this is where the United States can make all the difference. It must give the Lebanese the reassurances through a credible show that they are here. One key way can be an immediate, conditional boost for a sizable contingent of the LAF, of salaries, an immediate way to just send the resources the LAF needs, a good 15,000 soldiers, their salaries, the logistics for them, to implement right away. Second, a credible display that the United States alone can do, right? A movement, a military posture, right, close to Lebanon that says this is the end of Iran's dominion over Lebanon. This must be the end of their ability to coerce the Lebanese, to compel them. And for that, the United States must, on the one hand, empower the Lebanese to take the course of action, and I repeat, give them the image, the signal, right, that they are here, that they are not alone in this fight, and this is a fight, and I will stress this, that will end one way: the full defeat of Hezbollah, the full defeat of the Iranian regime in Lebanon.
Nick, you spoke about the issue of capabilities and the potential role of additional assistance from Washington. Capabilities are one thing, political will is another. Do you think the Lebanese government and the LAF have the will necessary to actually implement that if they have the support of Washington and the additional capabilities necessary?
Those are two very different things, the security establishment and the political government. I do think in the prime minister, you do have a credible voice that is pushing and has pushed for the state to be the only future for Lebanon. I think there was a caution before, I think there is a turning point. I think in the LAF, the signal from Washington has been very clear, and Senator Lindsey Graham said it. I am watching you. I'm watching everything you do, to quote him. And the LAF must join the fight or, to quote him, pay a heavy price. So there is the stick, and I think that is an important development in how Washington is looking at the LAF, right? It is saying support for the LAF is conditional on results. But at the same time, there is a strong component in the United States that sees value, that has invested significant time, resources in the LAF. And this is a great opportunity, and that's the carrot, right? And something we cannot lose sight of that I keep, and I mentioned this in an earlier article for MEI, the United States has a mentorship role over the LAF. Right. And now is this unique opportunity to, one, be very clear that action must be taken, and the action is very clear. The full disarmament of Hizballah, the full effort of the LAF to implement the decisions of the government. Because we need to be clear, the LAF, and has often said this, right, that its role is to implement the actions of the government. Great, implement it. And if you have an ask on the capabilities you need, what's your ask? That's where we need to shift the conversation, right? We need to shift from a conversation of these are all the reasons the LAF can't do its job, right? So it's constraints, it's worried about its resources, it's worried about, falling or facing desertions or facing challenges of entering. It's difficult to fight on your own terrain, right? There's a legitimacy problem. Fine, these are all the constraints, the challenges you face. What do you need to get the job done? Because the job will be done. And I think once that conversation shifts, right, it puts the Lebanese in a very clear sort of framework of this is the moment, this is a historic moment for you to reclaim your country, right, to give your people a real future, and to check and balance out, right, which has always been the complaint from Lebanon, the Iranian regime's ability to install this very, very malign, potent, lethal security infrastructure. So what are the resources in this moment to get the job done? If this is done with U.S. leadership, with security guarantees that the United States will not leave the Lebanese behind if they take such strong action. And, in a policy memo, I will get into the more technical recommendations. But for now, the bigger story is you need to take the steps from the United States to convey your strategic objective very clearly, right? 2, you need to provide your partner, your local partner, with the resources they need, the support they need to get the job done. And again, you need to make clear, right, that the job will be done, that it must be done. And this will push the Lebanese to take the steps. Because, you ask me what the prime minister will do, you ask me what the president will do, you'll ask me what the LAF will do. And the biggest point is, this is what the Lebanese people are demanding to our whole conversation. This is a government that is responsible to the Lebanese people, and its past approach, right, failed them. It has been given a rare second chance, a third chance even. It cannot afford to miss it, because if it misses it, right, they will have no support in the future, whether in the United States, in the region, or at home. It would have failed the Lebanese, right? And it will be we are really at this moment, I would just end, where either Lebanon, if the right decisions are taken by the Lebanese, and the United States can enable those conditions for the Lebanese to take those steps, if they are seized, we could really set the precedent for what the day after looks like, not just in Lebanon, but in the region, of how a state, a local state with legitimacy, with credibility, can rise above a sectarian militia that serves the interests of a very malign Iranian regime.
Nick, since we're speaking about political considerations and issues, very broadly, I kind of wanted to go back to something that you raised earlier, which is The Speaker of Parliament, Nabiq Berri, who also heads the Shia political party Amal movement, he's reportedly signed off on this move by the government to legally ban Hezbollah. How significant is this? The Amal party has long been politically aligned with Hezbollah. Do you think this suggests a broader rupture between Amal and Hezbollah? And if so, what does this mean for the future of Lebanese politics?
It's a good question. First, I would start off by saying they have a complex history of conflict and cooperation. So I think one always needs to keep that in the back of their mind. That being said, at the same time, Nabi Berri was a key architect in how Hezbollah was able to capture the state from within. And a real part of this mafia militia nexus. And again, with those of you who are following how Iran was able to destabilize so much of the region and how it managed to transform its own country, a big part of it is this nexus between a militia and a mafia. So yes, on the one hand, it certainly marks, a fissure between Hezbollah and Amal, right? That's important to recognize, and that also speaks strategically to how key stakeholders are viewing the future prospects of Hezbollah. But that's radically different than saying he is a trusted partner who can help build a credible state, because he was a chief architect in its demise, in its paralysis, including, right, before this point, how its members in the cabinet have voted and operated. So I think it's very important to make those distinctions, and I'll end it on this. If we are sincere, if we are honest about the future of including the Shia community, their interests, their wants, their needs after this conflict, after, the larger crisis that all Lebanon has been in, we must show real imagination and honesty to go beyond Hezbollah or Amal. And there is, again, in an upcoming article that we're writing at MEI, a remarkable new vision among Shia voices themselves for a future free of the mafia and free of the militia. And this is what I would stress is key for securing Lebanon and presenting a new model in Iraq, in Yemen. It is how can local legitimate actors, the state, rise above the mafia and the militia? And the answer to that question is not Nabi Berri, although I would stress exposing the fissure between them is key.
Nick, kind of extending off that point and zooming out almost to the sort of regional level, you spoke earlier about the widespread anger at Hezbollah among Lebanese, including those within the Shia community. You kind of zoomed out to potential political projects among the Shia. What do you see as the long-term consequences for Iran if it loses the Arab Shia? Can the Islamic Republic survive if it can't internationalize its resistance project?
It's an excellent question, Alistair. And you are asking the question, I think, that, and so many Lebanese, Iraqis, Yemenis have asked and have made a case for so long, especially since, the nuclear deal. Do not forget us. We are key. We are key to defeating this malign project, and leaving us will have consequences. And they made that argument not just to Washington, but to the Gulf states, that there was no ability for a fortress Arabia, for the progress of the Gulf states to build a wall, shield from themselves, the chaos and confrontation that Iran was presenting on these other battlefields, that they would come home unless that project was defeated. So on that level, right, that argument has always been there. And here we are. And the question must come down, right, to what do you do now that you are seeing these setbacks? On the one hand, you're seeing a real setback on the axis of resistance, so the things you're talking about, right? They are to different degrees in the different countries. I don't want to oversimplify it, but I think that is particularly acute in Lebanon today. And it is not lost on me, and it should not be lost on our audience, that it was Lebanon that was the hub of the axis of resistance. It was Hassan Nasrallah who personified the future of the axis resistance, and these two can be severed decisively. And if they are, in the same way Hezbollah turned Lebanon into the prototype of Iran's malign project, you can turn it into the archetype of defeating and setting the precedent of this is how you plan a day after where the state rises above. And to do that, it comes back to my earlier point. We need strategic alignment on the end goal, which is the rise of the Lebanese state. And that means the Gulf must see value again in Lebanon and the project of the state rising above, albeit uncompromising on the full defeat of Iran's security infrastructure in the country. There is no compromise with it. No compromise with it. The Doha Accords, right, when Hezbollah entered Beirut in a military takeover, has set the stage for where we are today. And so there is that level of alignment on the state rising above. But I will answer the second aspect of your question. Can this regime survive? And the answer is it will face its biggest setback if it loses its international partners, the access, the support that it takes from them. It will lose so much, right? One of the biggest outcries you hear domestically, right, in the earlier protests in Iran was they did not want their money, their funds of their hard sanction hit economy going to these foreign battlefields. So certainly that pressure will come. But I think this regime has lost its legitimacy long ago, and it survives because of coercion. We keep hearing the argument, right, that it is up to the Iranian people to decide their future. It certainly is. But they cannot decide that future truly in freedom as long as this regime commits industrial-scale mass atrocities. In Lebanon and Syria, in its own people, in Iran, this is the key point that cannot be lost in our debate, in our discussion. There are no easy answers, right? But what I would just like to end, this is a regime that has lost its legitimacy. It has lost the legitimacy of its project. Its ideology, right, is at its nadir, but it survives because of coercion. So that is very important, the next step of how do you remove that coercive capability without losing those losses of its legitimacy at home or in the region? How do you get willing local partners to fulfill what their people want? They are not fulfilling a foreign agenda, right? They are fulfilling what their people want to free themselves from this endless war, this ruin that Iran has imposed on them. So how do you do both? You need a credible state to emerge. And that for me is key. And I will repeat, a mass invasion will not achieve those objectives. An occupation of Lebanon will not achieve those objectives, right? Because, again, while there is a military solution to removing the coercive capabilities of Hezbollah, there needs to be a political solution. And the political solution, the infrastructure, the environment, it's all there. The willingness is there in Lebanon, which is a remarkably small country, easy to achieve, right? So don't lose sight of that political objective of the end goal.
Nick, we are quickly running low on time. You've made a very persuasive and powerful case about the hinge point that Lebanon finds itself in. Any final thoughts? What would you be watching going forward as to how Lebanon can navigate this very perilous situation it finds itself in today?
It shouldn't be me making that case to you. It should be the president of the Lebanese Republic. It should be the prime minister of Lebanon. It should be the government of Lebanon that is making that case. And it is not doing so convincingly enough. I do think it has taken important steps that can be built upon. But the points I would stress is, one, we need to understand that the reluctance of its decision-making is there. But it is not fundamentally ideological. It is institutionalized. It's a mindset of fear that the United States, its support will drift, and that it will be in a protracted war of attrition with a coercive, Hezbollah willing to kill, assassinate, intimidate, blackmail, use, and be backed by an Iranian regime in there for the long game while the United States drifts away. The answer to that is you need to offer one very clear communication of the strategic objectives the United States is willing to pursue in its war against Iran, and make clear to the Lebanese that this theater is no longer under Iran's chokehold. Communicating that clearly, with clear expectations of what the Lebanese should be doing, right? And communicating openly, what do you need to get the job done? And that shifts the conversation from one of, these are the excuses of why we can't do what we're doing, to this is what we need to get the job done, and creating a mechanism that you already have in place, a mentorship role you already have in place, an investment you already have in place, using that to push the Lebanese to take the steps only they can in a legitimate, organic way. And in that way, you balance out, right? You level the playing field that the Iranians have had, and you signal to the Lebanese, who are already reading the room, right? Not just the government, the entire country, right? That the Iranian regime is losing. Lebanon's government, its president, its prime minister, must be unified with one message to the Lebanese, first and foremost, to the region, its neighbors, its partners, to the United States, that it is willing, it is capable, and it is determined to do the job only a state can do, and that is ensure a full monopoly on force. It must make clear to everyone involved there is only one future for Lebanon, and it is the Lebanese state and not the militia. I will end this on this point. The Lebanese, this is the argument I'm making, if they are to survive and explain their relevance in a new regional order, which is coming, right? They must make clear what is the purpose of Lebanon. And what pains me is that before 2006, it was the Lebanese who are championing that voice of making clear every day why Lebanon matters, that the model matters, right? That you have in Lebanon an organic community that wants a democracy, that wants to be free, right, from, at the time, Syrian tutelage. And today you need a leadership that demonstrates that voice, that it is a reliable partner, that it wants to integrate in the regional economy, that it wants to participate in a future of development and growth, not endless war that do not serve its purpose, that do not liberate its land, but bring occupation to its land, that bring war to its land. That, for me, is the key.
Well, we'll have to leave it there. Nick, thank you so much for joining us this week on Middle East Focus.
Thank you for having me.
A warm thanks also goes out to our listeners for tuning in, as well as to our production team for all of their work on this week's episode.
We will include a link to Nick's latest piece in the show notes for this episode. And to find MEI's latest coverage of Lebanon, please visit our website at www.mei.edu. You can also follow MEI on X, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube, and subscribe to our email newsletters for the latest analysis and information about upcoming events. I'm Alistair Taylor.
And I'm Matthew Czekaj. We hope you'll listen in again next week.